Hello, I'm Jim McGregor from TIRIAS Research, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Francis Sideco. Now, we're both traveling this week, but there's a lot of announcements. This particular video is going to be focused on the announcements around Qualcomm's um, uh, technology. I don't know, what do they call it now?
Qualcomm
The
Snapdragon
Snapdragon
Summit.
Technology Summit
No, it's no
that's
more
being held.
technology. It's just Snapdragon Summit.
Okay, Snapdragon Summit.
Yeah.
It changed, all these events change their name all the time, but it is the technology, the Qualcomm Snapdragon Summit that's being held in Maui. So uh, I'm in Tempe, Arizona, and my esteemed colleague is in Maui. I don't know how that
Yeah.
happened.
As you can see, normally we use our backgrounds, but I thought you couldn't have any better background than what I've got here. So
Yeah,
I turned off the background.
yeah, rub it in. Thank you, Francis.
No
Okay,
problem.
now let's get going. The now first off, tell us about this because like every other event, it keeps morphing over the years. So
Yeah.
what's different about the technology summit this year?
And as you know, Jim, we actually have all 9 years now of tiki cups that they give out here. So it's kind of a collector's item at this point. But and we've been going to this show or to this event since the beginning. And one thing that was very that struck me very clearly is that it is definitely the evolution of Qualcomm that's showcased at this event, right? So they started off as a very mobile company. Cristiano very publicly has stated the strategy to try to diversify revenue channels and to really turn themselves into a connected computing company. And you see that over the last couple of Snapdragon summits. So last year it was all about the AI PC. This year it was back to mobile with 8 Elite that they announced, but then also a full day for auto where they announced Cockpit Elite and Ride Elite, and we'll talk a little bit about those naming conventions. But yeah, so this year it was, and that's a big change. You could really see the strategy getting affected even with their flagship launch event.
So let's talk about the key announcements first,
Yeah.
because obviously those are
Yeah.
the big highlights.
Yeah.
So I know they made announcements, especially around mobile. So why don't you go over the key announcements that we have now?
Sure. So the common thread around it was them bringing their Orion CPU, and it's really their second gen. So this is actually a new generation versus what was in the X Elite last year. So this is their second gen Orion CPU, and they brought it to mobile through the Snapdragon 8 Elite. And then they've also brought it to auto with their Cockpit Elite, Snapdragon Cockpit Elite, and Snapdragon Ride Elite. Of course, with Cockpit being their infotainment chipset, and the Ride Elite being their ADAS chipset. And as you can gather, uh, they've propagated that elite branding to signify that it has an Orion CPU in it, whether it's a first generation, or second generation. It's going to be interesting to see what they do with that branding moving forward as next generations come out, because especially with mobile, they had been going down this path of, Snapdragon 8 Gen whatever, Gen X. So we were expecting a Gen 4 that's turned into to 8 Elite. And one thing that was worth noting, and we'll either delve deeper into the technical aspects of it here or in the article that I know you're putting together, Jim. But it's not just a branding thing with this Elite. Bringing the Orion CPU to these platforms was a very highly technical feat, and has a lot of workload optimization for those specific areas. So yes, it's a branding change, but it also does signify a pretty significant technical innovation as well in bringing Orion to these applications.
And just for anybody that's not familiar with Orion, Orion is Qualcomm's custom CPU architecture. It
Yeah.
uses the ARM instruction set, but it is a custom CPU architecture, very
Yeah.
similar to what Apple did with their architecture, and
Yeah,
we've seen with pretty much anybody that's on that higher end, either in mobile or in server.
yeah,
So it is a major step for Qualcomm to go back to doing their own CPU cores
yeah.
and just using the ARM instruction set.
Yes.
So, and the although I'm kind of questioning the how are they going to do generational stuff with the Elite brand?
With the yeah, that was exactly the question that we had, and I think we'll have to see. I think it was actually asked in one of the small analyst roundtables, and it wasn't clear exactly how they were going to generationalize it, but we'll have to see. We'll have
Okay.
to.
So I guess the other question is how long can they make these brand names?
Yeah. Yeah, it keeps getting more and more stuff appended to it. So we'll have to see. I mean, that is a feedback we've given them, and Qualcomm does a pretty good job about trying to gather input and feedback and adjust from there. So we'll see where
Well,
they go.
I would recommend they start with either Elite One or Elite A, because if they start with like X or Z, they're not going to have many generations.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah, for
what
sure.
about when these products are going to be available?
Yeah. So I think they're expecting Elite 8 oh, 8 Elite. I'm sorry. I keep bringing it together or transposing it. I believe 8 Elite is later this year or early next year, and then definitely the cockpit and ride elite won't be till 2025 or later. Obviously on the auto side, it takes a longer time to bring these chips to market. So that'll be a later as far as cars on the road.
Now, is this Orion, the second gen Orion CPU core that you mentioned, is
Yeah.
it the same core that they're using across all these platforms, or are there slight differences?
It's relatively the same core, but yeah, I mean, once you get to the auto, they do have some changes that they've made to make sure they can pass ASIL D compliance, especially around the Ride Elite capability or the Ride Elite platform. So they have some changes there to meet those requirements, but for the most part, it's the same. And the second gen Orion CPUs don't have any efficiency cores. It's two prime cores and what they call them prime cores, and then the rest of the cores are performance cores. And it's worth noting that that's not just, again, a branding marketing thing, right? Some people might look at that and go, well, you still have a more performant core and a less performant core. So isn't that just a next generation performance and elite core? And the key to this is no, it's not. The prime core really is a pushing the boundary, and the reason why they're calling the performance core and not just a next generation elite core is it really has to do with the dynamic range of the power of the performance over power curve that these cores are able to provide. When you're talking about an elite core, even or an efficiency core, even a next generation efficiency core, it's a very limited performance dynamic range that you have over the power capability of that chip. The performance cores actually are able to do everything from what an efficiency core can do all the way up to what the typical performance core would be able to do from a workload standpoint, and be able to scale their power capabilities and power management across that whole threshold and deliver what you would expect from a typical core of that type, whether it's elite or performance. So I would look at these new performance core as basically a two-in-one core, where it can go all the way from what an efficiency core used to be able to do from a performance per watt standpoint, all the way to a performance core. And then you've got the prime cores that then do the heavy lifting.
So that's kind of an important point, is the fact that this Orion isn't really just one CPU core, but it's a family of CPU cores that they've
Oh yeah,
architected
there's
for different
there's
power
there's I
levels.
think there's two prime cores, and I believe there's four don't quote me on that. It's been a long week here in Hawaii, but I believe there's 4 performance scores associated with that.
I'm not giving you any rest just because you've been out, at luau's and having mai tais and stuff like that.
Easy. Well, hey, I've been battling a clout top all week, so it hasn't all been paradise over here.
Yeah, right. Well,
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it, Jim.
I guess the shining stars of the event are the Orion cores, all pun intended.
Yes.
So, any other key takeaways we should know about from the event?
No, I mean just they're full steam ahead. They had some big benchmarks that they put out. So that was kind of both on the not just on the mobile side, but they also actually updated their compute benchmarking narrative from even what we saw from IFA, especially now that they have some competitive products that were most recently released available on hand, and they did provide some clarity there. Obviously we didn't do these benchmarks ourselves, even though they did provide full visibility as to how they set everything up, all the options and settings of the of the benchmark tests and which devices they tested and things like that. But we didn't do it ourselves. So I'm not going to quote any of the numbers, but they did go into some of the claims that their competitors made and why potentially why from their point of view they weren't necessarily the best comparisons. And when you compare them to, I mean, the biggest thing that they said was, hey, the comparisons that were made by our competitors didn't take advantage of our top of stack SKU. They picked two of the lower SKUs even in the X Elite family, and when you bring in that top of stack, the picture changes completely differently. And when you do the test in an unplugged way, which actually we're doing in our tests, where we do both, every test both in a plugged scenario with the AC power to the wall and an unplugged scenario where it's running on battery life. There's some market differences with in the unplugged scenario. So at least from what they showed from their competitor standpoint, whereas they maintain performance throughout. So that was the only other thing that maybe wasn't as visible externally.
And what we've seen in the past, and I know this is also the case this year, is despite the fact that the Orion cores are really the architectural change to these products, Qualcomm doesn't stop there. There are enhancements to their image signal processors, to their neural processing units, to their graphics processing units, to pretty much every part of these chips with each generation. And it does have a huge impact. I mean, several generations ago, they went to using 3 ISPs within the mobile parts. So, I mean, they still continue to be a leadership kind of across the board, especially in mobile. And obviously now we've seen them be a major player in automotive, especially future automotive systems.
It's worth noting that that was one of the big changes in 8 Elite, is that they have a direct connect now between the ISP and the NPU. So there's no pre-processing or the manipulation of the raw ISP data before it gets to the NPU. And what that does is allows the NPU and AI basically to use camera feed as an actual sensor for the device to understand the world around it, as opposed to just having pixels coming through that it manipulates. So Durga Malati, the SVP I call him their chief AI officer. Obviously, he's not a CAIO, but he is basically the head of their AI. And one of the things he said was AI is the new UI, and so they're definitely setting these products up from a technical standpoint to be able to utilize AI as the new UI. So instead of keyboards, instead of mice and things like that, we're talking to them verbally. We're providing inputs through other sensors for the devices to have, and that's the multimodal input capability straight into the AI models for AI to then be able to do what you want them to do. So they're setting us up for that over the next few years, I'm sure.
This is definitely the agentic AI era where the
It is.
agents are
Yeah.
really our interface to technology and abstracting the rest of the technology, whether it's hardware, software, even the browser.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
no, good stuff. Look forward to seeing it all. I look forward to the demos.
Yes.
Glad that you got to go to Hawaii, even if I had to go to Vegas this week.
Hey, Vegas
Uh,
isn't bad. That's my hometown right now.
no, thank you very much for the update, Francis. And if anyone has any questions, please contact us here at TIRIAS Research. You can contact us through our website or directly through email at francis@TIRIAS Research or
.com.
jim@TIRIASresearch.com. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Thanks, everybody.